Torenberg, co-founder and partner of Village Global, and Balaji Srinivasan, CTO of Coinbase. So please give a warm welcome to Erik and Balaji.
What's up, everybody? How are we doing? We're doing good. Please give a round of applause. Welcome, Balaji. Welcome, yourselves. Before we get started, there's a little bit of a congratulations in order. I don't know if you guys have been following Balaji's May and early June, but it's been pretty significant. Not one, but two acquisitions. Almost $500 million in exits, and we sort of joke, overnight success, 10 years in the making. Council started almost 10 years ago, or over 10 years ago, and Earn, which sold to Coinbase. So now you're the CTO of Coinbase. Talk about what's Coinbase's mission right now, and what's your focus within that broader mission?
Yeah, sure. I think a great way to think about Coinbase is it's the interface, right? It's the interface between the legacy banking system and kind of this blockchain future. And similar to actually like AOL in the early days in a way where it was the interface between legacy phone lines and this internet future. But when you're talking about the interface between banking and crypto, we think of it as like, the classical mullet business, business in the front and party in the back. What that means is we need to maintain good relationships with banks and regulators and politicians to maintain our fiat rails. And we also need to be on the cutting edge of crypto and blockchain, to make sure we're abreast of that. And so there's a kind of duality to the business. And while I spend time on both sides, certainly my focus is more on the crypto side, making sure that that end of the business is working. One of our biggest focuses that we've talked about is trying to push crypto from the investment phase into the utility phase. So lots and lots of people have bought crypto and have made money on it, hoping having it go up. But the next phase is now that millions of people around the world value this, you can actually use it as a payment rail, and that's actually kind of an important one.
Yeah. So 20 million Coinbase accounts. How many Coinbase accounts are there?
I think we stopped publishing the exact number.
Okay.
We need scientific notation.
How do we get orders of magnitude more people using crypto?
Right, so great question. So we want to go from where we are to like 1 billion users, right? And how do we get 1 billion people onto the blockchain? Well, what's interesting about that is, if you think about what Facebook did, they sent 1 billion people over about 8 years. And if you just think about what the sign-up service would be required to do that, it's about 4 people every second for 8 years, right? It's about 320,000 a day times that per year over that period of time. And so it's simply, a sign-up service taking 4 requests per second is actually a pretty high traffic web service. And if you now multiply that by, all the other stuff you need to do on the site and all the traffic on the blockchain, that's going to be a very non-trivial technical feat. What it also means is actually that even in 3 years from now, the vast majority of people in the world will, even if the growth rate is totally vertical, the vast majority of people in the world will still be being introduced to crypto. So a huge part of it is going to be education and onboarding, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future.
So with Earn, you were trying to do a few things. One of those things was create a parallel economy.
Yeah.
People can get paid. 2 was create the infrastructure for the machine payable web. Talk about how partnering with Coinbase allows you to achieve your broader vision, what you're trying to do with Earn.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we think that there is room for a new generation of social networks, which I call kind of blockchain-first social networks. Critically, the idea is not to try to decentralize everything at once. I think going full blockchain in 2018 is hard to do. Instead, think of the blockchain as a second kind of back-end service that provides your users with A, balances, and B, private keys, and thus the ability to encrypt messages and sign contracts and all that type of stuff. And if you have that as an augmentation to an existing social network with its Postgres database and ability to serve up images and what have you, you've got something quite powerful because you can go from a social network where people just poke and like and tweet at each other to something where they're actually earning money, right? They're completing tasks, they're replying to emails and getting paid and so on. And so that's kind of this next generation of social networks. And Earn was actually doing quite well with profitable business, making millions of dollars in revenue, simply because lots of businesses want to pay to reach people, right? Like, people will definitely pay to get a reply to an email, to get a survey completed, etc. With Coinbase's user base, we have like many millions of users, and the idea would be to put those two together, so now we can have millions of people completing tasks and getting paid for earning cryptocurrency. The reason I think this is interesting is in the 3 to 5 year window, what we'd love to do is take all these people around the world who have smartphones and not just give them information, but give them income. Right? They open the Earn app. They've got a list of tasks, and those tasks are personalized to them. And if you can program, then you can get a JavaScript task, or if you're a lawyer, you get a legal task, and so on. And just like the Twitter feed, you never run out of tasks that you can do. You can just earn money from anywhere. That's where we want to be in like 5 years.
And you gave a couple talks over the past couple of years. One of them was called Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit. The other was called The Network State. Sort of building upon a few ideas, but one of them was this broader concept of there isn't enough exit in terms of where we live, and governments and cities should be competing over the best talent and offering so that they're offering better services, so that we're having more experimentation, more experiments, similar to Amazon had a lot of cities in the U.S. competing over who gets Amazon's HQ, or special economic zones, which are found in China. Talk about what you were trying to do or achieve with those talks, and what's the next iteration of that talk in 2018?
Yeah, good question. So, the concept of competitive government is certainly not something that's novel to me or to anything like that. Insofar as there is a novel aspect to this, it's kind of thinking about, okay, how does new technology actually make competitive government possible, right? There's a few observations. One is that mobile is making us more mobile, and law is a function of latitude and longitude. That's to say, your XY location determines the local and then the state and the federal overlays that apply to you and that constrain or incentivize your behavior. So if law is a function of latitude and longitude and mobile is making us more mobile, it's becoming easier to change your latitude and longitude, and thus easier to change the law under which you live, right? That's like an interesting combination of two obvious observations that lead to a non-obvious observation, which is the cost of changing your law, your governing law, is decreasing rapidly. Because you can just use a smartphone and you can call an Uber and get an Airbnb, and all your books are in the cloud and your music's in the cloud, and you're just more mobile as an individual. Your friends are in the cloud. That's an underappreciated aspect of social networks. The penalty for moving is less, because many of your friends, you don't even actually know where they live anymore, but you're still friends with them on Facebook or on Snapchat or whatever, right? So that's kind of one aspect of it, is this increased mobility is increasing the ability for people to exit, and that's making a lot of the ideas around competitive government that have been around for decades newly relevant. I think the second aspect is the stuff you can do in place. So not necessarily physically moving, but I think there's 3 technologies that are going to be converging over the next 10 years or so, which are social networks, blockchain, and VR. So social networks with blockchain is what we just talked about, which are social networks that you can actually go and earn money in, right? And I think that's the next 5 years. So earn is one variation of that. Steam is another variation. I think there's going to be others. And these will have, use the blockchain in different ways. Some will, pay people for generating content. Some will pay people for, replies and complete tasks like we're doing. Some of them will, pay people to, or use more of the encryption features to be pseudonymous. The other leg of it is social networks plus VR. You're seeing some of that already with like VR chat, right? Basically, VR communities that, are kind of like MMORPGs, which have been around for 15 years, very immersive, except kind of addressing a different audience. And I think eventually all 3 of those technologies come together, maybe in 10 years. I think 5 years would be the very earliest. And when you get social networks plus blockchain plus VR, that's what I call like a digital economy, right? And a digital economy is something where you can put on your next generation VR headset and you can actually work there, right? That's your morning compute. Your morning commute is your morning compute, right? And you just, boom, you go into this VR world and you're earning digital currency for doing digital work. And more work is already becoming digital. It's not just programmers and designers and so on, but legal work is all electronic, right? A lot of medical work is fundamentally about returning a diagnosis or returning instructions given inputs. Even things like construction work are turning into instructions to drones and things like that. So more and more work will become digital, more and more people will go into these digital economies. And that's really amazing, because that means you don't necessarily need a visa. You just need to be able to log into that, that digital economy. And so if you want a borderless world, that's where it gets to, right? But I do believe that, that login service, you're not going to let in every single person into that login service. It's going to be, if they're a bad actor, you will ban them or whatever. But it will be much more flexible. You'll have, quote, visas to thousands of these virtual countries, these digital economies, and that's what you'll be able to earn.
And let's say more about how identity is going to look like, because when we say pseudonymous, people automatically assume anonymous and assume that there's going to be no accountability.
Right.
So talk about where's the balance there between freedom, between accountability, how's that going to work? So
Yeah, great question. So there's a huge difference between anonymous, pseudonymous, and like full real name, right? And like, you know, a full real name is like a global identifier that's an identifier of identifiers. It links you across everything. You can plug it into a database and pull your social security information and your current address and, you know, tax stuff and employment history and all that type of stuff, right? So it's like a primary key in the database. But a pseudonym, whereas a completely anonymous identity has no metadata whatsoever, right? A pseudonym is intermediate, where you have, you know, some track record, right? You have some posting history, and with cryptocurrency, you might have some earning history, or you might have a stake associated with it. So you could imagine, for example, a Twitter, like a V2 Twitter or a crypto Twitter, where everybody had to stake like $1, and if you behave badly, someone would just be able to block you, but they could burn your dollar. Right? And now that'd be something that wouldn't necessarily benefit them, and they wouldn't do it for just, you know, a random reason. But what it would mean is that people would actually be polite because their pseudonymous identities were tied to like $1, and there'd be a cost for actually going and just screaming at someone on the internet.
Imagining YouTube comments.
Oh my God, yeah. So like the thing is, you know, this is not a completely unheard of concept. VKontakte in Russia actually charged like $1 for people to you know, get signed up, and that was immensely useful in terms of just making people behave better, right? Like a slight amount of skin in the game making people behave better.
Yeah. So we're at the Borderless Summit. I want to talk both on the how it affects, you know, macro trends, but also, you know, people's personal careers. And one of the things we talked about in the past is your idea is concept where, you know, in the past 10, 15 years, someone like Y Combinator has said, move to San Francisco, start a company, and raise venture. And now in a new world, in some ways, your thesis, one of the thesis is, you know, you can live anywhere or move away, it's cheaper. You don't have to start a company, work remotely, and save money, preserve your runway. Talk more about that thesis and what that means for entrepreneurs and operators.
Yeah, and so to be clear, I have a lot of respect for Y Combinator and PG and everything they've done. But in the same way that, like, you know, your tech stack in 2005, you know, might have been Java-based or whatever, and now it's not. It's going to be, you know, like something different, right? In the same way, some of the things that were true then are no longer as true now, right? You don't need to come to Sand Hill anymore to raise capital. You can do it via, you know, ICOs. That's very new. You don't need to live in the United States to have a good standard of living. Many countries around the world, especially in Asia, have dramatically improved over the last, you know, 10, 20 years in terms of standard of living. And, you know, just like as a show of hands, for who here has rent as their number one expense? Okay, most of you are actually wrong. Tax is probably your actual number one expense. But rent is probably your number two. And it is much, much, much easier to chop your living expenses, your rent and your burn rate, to 1/5, to 20% or 10% of what they currently are, that decrease your net worth by 10x, right? So moving overseas to a place like Kuala Lumpur or, you know, like some inexpensive locale that still has fast internet, right? There's companies like this Nomad List. There's a company that I founded, we sold it a couple of years ago called Teleport, that are search engines for location, which allow you to take your current lifestyle and find a location around the world that best suits you, which also reduces your cost of living, right? If you can do that, if you can move overseas and now cut your burn rate by, you know, 5x, you know, I think the most important metric for an individual is your personal runway, which is your savings divided by your burn rate. And everybody thinks about the top line, but very, very few people think about the bottom line, which they actually have more control over. And now that we're in this era of remote work and mobile and you know, like a lot of folks here are software engineers or designers or someone who can work internationally. If you're just starting out, what I'd advise you to do is go get a job at Google or Facebook or Coinbase or what have you. You know, have a good salary or what have you. Kick butt at least for the first year. And then consider maybe turning down the promotion and instead asking, hey, you know, show myself to be a responsible person, show myself to kick butt. Let me move overseas so that I can keep the same salary, but I can bank, you know, 40, 50, 60% more per year, right? Then in a couple of years, you've got years of personal runway because you've just cut your expenses so much that if you've got, you know, 30K a year expenditure and you've got 100,000 in savings, you've got 3 years. So you don't need angel financing. You can just bootstrap the business yourself, own 100% of the equity. So I think that's a really interesting strategy that's newly possible in 2018 that hasn't been possible before.
Let's zoom out and get more macro. How are governments viewing blockchain and crypto right now? How should they be viewing it? How's the US viewing it? How's China viewing it? And you guys as the forefront of of bringing crypto to the world, how do you think about the role of government?
Yeah, so I think there's been a huge, frankly, positive shift over the last 5 years, where there's not a day that goes by where some government official or bank or politician doesn't make some comment, pro or con, on blockchain technology. But if you zoom out for a second, what are Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon and Christine Lagarde and Ben Bernanke and all these people, what are they talking about? They're talking about blockchain, right? They're not talking about, I don't know, something else, right? They're not talking about disappearing photos or what have you. They're talking about blockchain. And so that means that this thing that started on an internet forum, right? Like one pseudonymous person or group 10 years ago has shaken the world with just the power of an idea and the power of the execution of that through software. And the world is moving in the direction of blockchain. If you zoom out, you look at, okay, what does the last 5-10 years look like? Well, I mean, we've got something where heads of state in Malta and Bermuda are doing meetings with blockchain companies. We've got something where the head of the IMF has given a whole speech about how blockchain is like an important corrective to central banks and whatnot. And the reason I think that's interesting is, yes, there's pro and con comments, but for every con, there's a pro, right? For every, Jamie Dimon, there's a Lloyd Blankfein who's saying positive things about blockchain. So that, like at a high level, is very important because it only, if 100% of the world's governments and institutions and so on were aligned against blockchain, it'd be difficult. But it's not 100%. In fact, like 50% are pro. And so long as everybody doesn't stop it, it's going to flourish in those regions, those areas, those institutions that do support it. And so I think it's going to break through.
But just to interrupt for a second, there's some smart people. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates recently thrown shade. What are they not seeing, or where are their points justified, or anything like that?
So, obviously super smart people. Buffett has said, for example, that he doesn't understand technology companies and that he was wrong on Amazon and so on, right? Bill Gates, a different matter, but, even Bill Gates, Kahoot was out there, right? There are things that they missed at Microsoft. And super smart people, lots of respect for them. But, it doesn't actually matter if they're critical because the blockchain just kind of keeps going, right? One thing I will mention in terms of government resistance, I feel actually pretty confident on this point now, because early last year, China was, Chinese exchanges were most of the volume, most of the mining was in China. People thought, well, if there was a huge crackdown by the Chinese government, blockchain would be in big trouble. That actually did happen, right? China took a pretty hard swing at the blockchain last year. Exchanges were shuttered, mining was encouraged to move overseas. A lot of people were seriously inconvenienced. But, like Nietzsche said, it did not kill the blockchain, it made it stronger. Price went up like more than 10x, right, for both Bitcoin and Ethereum. The entire ICO boom happened, right? And that was probably, certainly the government of the largest country by population in the world, and certainly one of the most technically sophisticated and frankly aggressive in terms of what they're willing to do in terms of internet filtering and privacy monitoring and all that type of stuff. They took a hard swing at the blockchain, sub 20x, right? And so I think that's kind of the trial run. I do think there's at least one thing that we have not yet encountered, which we may encounter at some point, which is partition tolerance. You could imagine Great Firewall actually starting to try to block packets, at port 853, which is a Bitcoin port or other ports. And if you really start doing deep packet filtering, there's a predator-prey kind of aspect to it. There's a possibility that mining extends the blockchain within China, but transactions are happening outside it, and then there'd be a peekaboo effect where you may not be able to see those transactions. There might be a partition. So I think partition-tolerant blockchains are an important thing to research to kind of guard against that. That's like kind of the last man to beat in terms of government challenges. But I actually feel pretty good about it because anything short of that, we've kind of already survived, and we're going to do well.
So you're a history buff.
Yeah.
We talk about Chinese history, Russian history, French history. Which historical period do you think right now is most analogous to something we're thinking about right now as it relates to crypto, as it relates to technology, as it relates to innovation?
Yeah, I think 1800s America in reverse. Right. Okay. So I think of 1950 as peak centralization. So you have one telephone company and you have two superpowers and you have 3 television stations. And then if you move forward and backwards in time, things get more decentralized. So if you move forwards in time from 1950, you get cable television and then you get the internet frontier opening in 1991. Basically, commercial internet traffic became legal then. If you move backwards in time, almost exactly 100 years earlier, 1890 is when the frontier closed. And if you move forward, 20 years from 1990, you get to 2010, the era we're in now, where you have all of these wealthy folks who made money in the internet era, all this radically fast innovation, where you have bare field, bare service before now you've got something. Move backwards in time from 1890, you get a similar era where you have Rockefeller and you have Carnegie and you have all these tycoons, nowadays called robber barons, but at the time called captains of industry, who built railroads and who built basically kind of, the West in America. And you go a little bit further back and you get to the time of private banking, right? So Business Insider has this whole thing on this, the free banking era where banks would issue their own script. And it's kind of similar to what we're in now, right? And so I think 1800s America, kind of moving backwards in time, starts to be a good parallel for our current era, where things get more and more decentralized. Then you get to 1700s America, then things get interesting.
What can we learn from, I know you're fascinated by China, by both its in some ways radical free market zones, but also sort of heavy state control there. What are sort of the misconceptions about China that we have in the West, and what can we learn from them?
Yes, so I mean, obviously China has its pros and cons, but I think, so one of the biggest is the Chinese are actually much more innovative than people give them credit for, especially today. They've kind of ascended the value chain, and they are, just like Japan had certain areas that they became very internationally competitive in, automobiles and consumer electronics and other kinds of stuff. China has chosen certain domains like drones, with DJI and genomics with BGI, and actually, weird way of blockchain. Xi Jinping actually just made some positive comments on it. There's certainly a lot of Chinese leaders in the space, even if the Chinese government is kind of on two minds and quasi, like attacking it. And certainly AI, which they're all in on. One thing that's really interesting is the asymmetric nature of it, where Chinese entrepreneurs read TechCrunch, they're hyper aware of everything going on in the US. And US entrepreneurs do not go and look at 8btc.com, and they don't read Chinese blogs and so it's very asymmetric, where this group is aware of all the ideas from here, but not vice versa. I think, better translation stuff might change that. I think the blockchain is really interesting because for the first time I'm seeing a lot of seed stage interaction between Chinese capitalists and Chinese, entrepreneurs and American and Western ones. And we'll see what happens.
Another idea you've been really fascinated by, a lot of people have been fascinated by, is tokens. And tokens is set, a lot of people just, confuse tokens and ICO. It doesn't necessarily have to be for raising money, but just for aligning incentives within a network. One sub-idea you talked about is personal tokens. Talk a little bit about that, or any other ideas related to tokens that are really fascinating right now.
Sure. So, if you take your company, right, you've got different ways to finance it. Two of those ways, certainly not all, but two of those ways are debt financing and equity financing. Debt financing, you take, a loan, and you take a loan of $1 million, and then you have to pay back like 1.2 million or 1.3 million over a period of time, right? And that works if you're a cash flow business, you're generating cash, right? Conversely, equity financing, you don't take a loan, you sell a percentage of your kind of capital structure or your cap table, and you don't have to pay it back in cash. Instead, if you're bought, then the early investor gets some of those proceeds, right? So in the same way, right now, the way that people are funding a lot of their lives is with student loans and 30-year mortgage, which are just two forms of debt financing, right? What if we could bring equity-style financing down to the level of the individual, where if you, rather than taking on a student loan at age 18 when people don't know what their future is, instead, based on their SATs and their GPA and all the other stuff they submit to college, you can imagine people would issue a personal token, and then buyers of that personal token would sort of bet that this person will achieve things in their life, and they'll get a return on that. There's various ways to accomplish that. For example, if you sell a personal token and you sell 20% of it, then you commit to having 20% of your equity of any company that you go in and put into this pool, and then it's returned back to the folks who backed you initially. Various ways to structure it. The tricky part is, of course, going to be how do you make sure that that person actually pays their money into that crypto account and doesn't renege on it. There's probably reputational services that can take that into account. And the cool thing about this is you wouldn't have a lifetime of debt when you get out of college and you're a young person, and instead you have a different way to finance your life. There's selfipo.com is you're the one who said that link. We've been talking about this for a while, so that's kind of our first cut of the concept.
So let's summarize. How does blockchain best enable global equality for people out there in India or wherever listening? How should they be thinking about it as a way to directly improve their life? And on a macro sense, although like all technology, we're aligned that it's overall net positive, what are some of the trade-offs that we make in this process, and how can we correct against them a little bit? How should we think?
Sure. I think what blockchain means is what technology means. It means more upside and more downside, right? Cryptocurrency is it's like the Unix of money. You can move millions of dollars with a keystroke, or you can ruin dash RF your entire fortune. right? So I think on balance, it's going to be positive because what we'll do is all those failure modes, we can usually use technology to fix those. For example, you can have backup keys or multi-sig, so you can't just delete all your own keys, but someone else can help restore them. So I think on balance, it's going to be positive, but in the short term, it's going to be more upside, more downside.
And I think what people often don't realize is how important hyperliquidity is and what that means. Can you share more about the benefits of really liquid markets?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I mean, if you compare like American versus European options in traditional financial markets, the difference between the two is due to the fact that one of them you can exit at any time, over the time of maturity, whereas the other one you have to wait until the end to exit. And the fact that you can get out of the position somewhere in between versus at the end, that you have that liquidity, does itself have a premium, have a value that you can assign to it. So there is a liquidity premium, and anything that can be tokenized eventually will be, simply because of that liquidity premium. The ability to sell your position or get back in within like months or a year rather than 10 years is a very big deal. Now, obviously, that has to be done in a way that's compliant with local regulations and what have you, but there will be at least some governments that adopt that kind of mentality, and those are the ones that are going to attract the next Wall Street baseball auction.
Awesome. Well, that's all our time for today. Please give a round of applause for Balaji. Erik Torenberg and villageglobal.vc. Balaji, where can people find you online and what's upcoming for you at Coinbase?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, twitter.com, Balaji. Yes, I don't post on there too much, but also blog.coinbase.com.
Awesome. Another round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erik and Balaji. What's next? So we have a very exciting talk coming up. One of our good friends, friend of Founders Embassy. We're talking a lot about financial capital and the value, but I think one of the most important